So let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful, Lord, this morning for the opportunity to once again study together. We ask for your Holy Spirit to be poured out upon this meeting. Help us, Lord, to understand the things that are in your word, to understand the past, and to understand the present and the future. We ask for light for our feet, and we ask that your Holy Spirit can work conviction upon our hearts and the work of sanctification. We ask that you can be with each person. You know the struggles that each of us has. Help us, Lord, to cling to you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we had dealt yesterday with the midway, what midway was about. And so we worked out the chronology a little bit more in detail, just to make it really clear that that's July 21st. And so that was the first part of this statement in the Great Controversy, dealing with the midway, behold, the bridegroom cometh. So hopefully everybody remembers what we were talking about there. Now, this other part, this statement here, that which led this movement to what, that which led to this movement, that is the movement of the seventh month movement, was the discovery that the decree of Artaxerxes for the restoration of Jerusalem, which formed the starting point for the period of the 2300 days, went into effect in the autumn of the year 457 BC, and not at the beginning of the year, as had been formerly believed. Reckoning from the autumn of 457, the 2300 years terminate in the autumn of 1844. Now, Ellen White's quite careful on how she words this. Now, you will see many Adventists believing that the decree was given in the fall of 457 BC. How many people have believed that the decree of Artaxerxes was given in the fall of 457 BC? At some time or other, believe that. You know, I can raise my hand and say that I believe that.
I would be right with you.
Yeah. And I would think that, you know, one is it's the most common thing that we are told in evangelistic series, that Artaxerxes issued his decree in the fall of 457 BC. But we know that can't be the case if Ezra's journey began in the spring of 457 BC. That means he had to have had that decree in hand as he journeyed from Babylon to Jerusalem. So as to when the decree was issued, it would have been issued in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Now, that means Artaxerxes' 7th year. From Artaxerxes' perspective, his 7th year ended on the first day of the first month in 457 BC. That would be the end of Artaxerxes' 7th year, according to Artaxerxes. Now, the Jews at that time were not counting Artaxerxes' reign spring to spring. They were considering it fall to fall. And so this becomes a little bit of a tricky issue, but an important one when we're dealing with those that are criticizing Adventist understanding of the start of the 2300 days and the 70 weeks. So I'm just going to go to the whiteboard again and address this. There you can see I was teaching music yesterday. And
one question while you're preparing this on the board.
Yeah.
Could it be said then that there needed to be a preparation time?
Okay, what do you mean a preparation time?
Well,
when the decree is issued to when he leaves?
Right.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. He definitely they're not going to just leave the day they get the decree. I mean, they have to plan. So this decree is issued. So I'm going to try to draw this out. So here you're going to have the first day of the first month. Now, this is going to be the year 457 BC. I'll do it this way. Just make it a bit further up. So here you have 457 BC. Now 457 BC is going to start on January 1st, and it's going to go to December 31st. And this is going to be April 26th. Now, technically speaking, this date here is the start of the Jewish year. So the Jews are going to be counting, and this is assumptions we have to make. But we're gonna make the assumption that when Ezra talks about the first day of the first month, he's talking about the Jewish calendar. Now, the Babylonians do not number the months. They name their months, but the Jews have a count. And now if they're saying Nisan, right? Sometimes it is 2S, but this is Nisanu. This is the Babylonian name of the month, and this is the Hebrew. So the Jews originally, they called this month Aviv or Abib. And so if they're talking about this, this would just be the old Hebrew name. This is basically the Hebrewized version of this month. And the same when they talk about like Adar, you know, they're using the Babylonian name Adaru. So this is the original name for Nisan, and we don't know all of the original names of the months. But from the time of Moses, they begin to number the months. And we also know in the story of Noah, the months are numbered, but those numberings are not this numbering. That's just the numbering in the age of Noah. So in his 600th year, in the second month of his 600th year of life, on the 10th day of the month, that's when the door of the ark closes. And I've taken pains to show that that's actually the 7th month according to this counting. So the door closes on the 10th day of the 7th month in 2390 BC, or 2391 BC, which is October 22nd on the Julian calendar, that the door of the ark closes. But this numbering system that we're using here comes from the Exodus. So when it says, this month shall be to you the beginning of months, that's when they start numbering the months in a fixed way, not based upon how old you are, and you know, it's the 4th month of my 25th year or whatever, right? This is now a fixed system. Now, according to 457 BC, according to the Babylonian calendar, the month that began on March 27th was this is the month Nisanu. So this would be when Artaxerxes' 7th year ended. So this is Artaxerxes' 7th year. It's going to end on March 27th. Now the Jews are going to count this as the first day of the 13th month. That is, in 457 BC, they're going to add this extra month. So technically, Artaxerxes' 7th year ended a month before Ezra left Babylon. So even if we talk about a preparation here, the Jews are counting Artaxerxes' 7th year from over here from the fall, from the first day of the 7th month. And they're going to count his year over here to the fall of 457 BC. So they're going to call this his 7th year. So this journey, when it occurs in the 7th year, that's going to be basically a month after the 7th year of Artaxerxes ends. And we have this worked out. So now there could be a mistake here. That is, we don't have a document saying that the 7th year ended here, that it could have ended here, but it's most likely based on how the Babylonians kept their calendar that it would have ended here. So even then, Artaxerxes theoretically could have issued his decree at the beginning of his 8th year, according to his reckoning, but it would still be counted as the 7th year here. And one of the ways we know this is in the book of Nehemiah, where you have the 20th year of Artaxerxes, and it mentions the 9th month, and then the month Nisan, or the first month, and it's still going to be in the 20th year. So there is this indication that the Jews are counting fall to fall when they're counting Artaxerxes' reign in this period of time. They don't always do that. So when Adventists, though, try to say that the decree was issued in the fall of 457 BC, and there were Adventists teaching this, there was a lot of confusion in 1844 exactly how to count Artaxerxes' reign. And if you look at Samuel Snow, where does he place Artaxerxes issuing the decree initially? Maybe I should go and look at some of his documents, because this is an important point.
I think you should go look at the document.
Yeah. So, because he gets it wrong, Samuel Snow gets it wrong at different times, and other people get it wrong. And so they have this huge problem of trying to sort out exactly what's happening, because they're trying to work out the details of something that they don't have enough information to work out. And they have conflicting chronologies telling them different things.
So does that mean that when they chose the 10th day of the 7th month, that was kind of an arbitrary choice? Oh, hey, this is the Day of Atonement, let's choose that one. Arbitrary?
No.
Well,
the cleansing of the sanctuary is going to happen on the 10th day of the 7th month. So that's not arbitrary. That's based upon typology.
Were they thinking of the typologies separately from the chronology then, or were they really trying to blend the two together?
Well, they were trying to sort out the chronology and trying to understand the typology. So, yeah, they didn't have a full understanding of what happened. So even in 1844, there was not an agreement exactly on how to understand 457 BC. Now, when it comes to the issue that they had regarding the fullness of the year, which is all tied up in this, what I would do is have a paper. Where is this here? Yeah. Here, I'll share this. Okay, that's not working. Yeah, okay. So, here we go. Okay, so here you have the Millerites full year, no 0 year paper. And there's a whole bunch of statements in here. First, I start with some Jehovah's Witnesses problems that they had. And then Miller looked at it. So I want to get over to what happened. Cardinal versus ordinal. Okay, so this is a good paper if somebody wants to understand the problems that were happening. So we're going to deal with the full year concept. This leads to how the Millerites accounted for the lack of a 0 year when they first realized the mistake in Miller's reckoning. Now, here's what Gerhard Damstedt says. During 1843, as a result of careful analysis of the prophetic time calculations, several adjustments were introduced, which were gradually accepted. The first correction may be designated the full year concept. Now, you may have heard about the full year, and there was this real problem in the movement that not everybody was aware of. But it created a lot of confusion because some people would say that it wasn't about there being no 0 year that the mistake was made, but it was a thing called the full year mistake. And that's not really correct. The problem wasn't about the full year. The problem was that they had not taken into account there was no 0 year. The full year concept is just an explanation of how to address the problem that there was no 0 year. So it was discovered that it was a mistake to calculate the period between 457 BC and 1843 by simply adding the figures together as if they were cardinal numbers. They are ordinal numbers, not separated by a 0, so that only 1 year separates one BC from AD 1. So you can see it is about there being no 0 year, but they use this idea of the full year to maintain or retain the 1843 date, because they had made the charts in 1842, or the 1843 chart, the 300 charts. They made those in 1842. And in 1843, they now come to understand that there is no 0 year, but they don't want to have to modify the chart. So they come to understand that it's full years from January 1st, 457 BC to December 31st, 1843, or more specifically, if you go from the first day of the first month in 457 BC, 2300 full years would end on the 30th day of the 12th month in 1844, or as it worked out, there's actually a 13th month, so that in 1844. So that would be on April 18th. That's the last day of the Jewish year. That would be the end of 2300 full years, counting from the first day of the first month in 457 BC. So if you go from April 26th, which is the Julian date in 457 BC, and technically it's April 19th, I believe, in 457 BC on the Gregorian. It might be April 20th. It would go all the way to April 19th, would be the first day of the first month in 1844. That would be 2300 full years. But because they hadn't taken into account the 0 year, initially they were short by a year. Now I say that Damstedt's description is not completely accurate. Now, it is very accurate, but not completely accurate. That is, he's left out some details. So one is, we will see that it was not William Miller that first noticed this oversight. At least we cannot find a single reference to it in his writings. Joshua Vheim is the first to make mention that the span from 1 BC to 1 AD was 1 year and not 2. He also introduces the full year concept at the same time. We will see that this was to compensate for the absence of the 0 year and is not to be confused with the fact that there was no 0 year. So I wouldn't say that maybe he's not completely accurate, but he's leaving out some details that confused people. That is, there were people reading Damsteed's statement, and I think it was actually Duane Dewey who introduced the idea that it wasn't about a 0 year, it was about the full year. But I'm not 100% certain. It could have been someone else. So this is from Signs of the Times, June 21st, 1843. So you can see this is in the summer of 1843. Here's how Vheim says it. Many seem not to understand how the 2300 years can be said not to expire before the end of 1843 Jewish time. To make out 2300 full years, it is necessary that there should be 457 full years BC and 1843 full years after Christ. So what he's saying is he's taking these 2300 years and he's dividing it, taking the 70 weeks and the remaining part, and he says they have to be full years. It is evident from a given point in the year 1 BC to the same point in 1 AD would be but one entire year upon the same. So that means if you went from June 1st, 1 BC to June 1st, 1 AD, that would be 1 year. You wouldn't just add 1 BC and 1 AD and get 2 years. So he says upon the same principle, from a given point in the year 457 BC to the same point AD 1843 would be but 2,299 entire years. So they recognized if you went from April 26th, 457 BC, the first day of the first month, and then you went to 1843 on April 26th, that would be 1 year short of 2300 years. It is minus 1 year of 2300 full years. The year 1843 is not 1843 years from the birth of Christ, but only the 1843rd year, which at its commencement was but 1842 years from that era. If therefore the 2300 years began at a given point in the year 457 BC, they would not end till the same point is reached in AD 1844. So this became the realization that if you're going to start the 2300 days or the 70 weeks, when are you going to start them in 457 BC? According to how they were looking at it in 1843, where are they going to start the 2300 years and the 70 weeks?
More likely in the spring.
Yeah, so they're going to start them in the spring. And if they counted in the spring in 457 BC, that means it would end in the spring of 1844. So they came to recognize this because they recognized there was no 0 year. Prior to that, Miller would have understood that if the 2300 days began in the spring of 1843, they would end in the spring of 1840, or started in the spring of 457 BC. They'd end in the spring of 1843. That's how he first would have done his math. Now we know this because Miller, and I skipped some of that, but when he dealt with the 70 weeks, where did he start the 70 weeks? Does anybody remember where he began the 70 weeks? The 490 years.
I recall that he ended it in 33 AD.
Right. So he ended it in 33 AD. And he said it was 490 years to the day. That's
right.
his words. So he started it when they left the river Ahava on the 12th day of the first month. So that's in Ezra chapter 8. Because they go to the river Ahava, they wait there for 3 days, they get the Levites, they come back, right? And then they leave on the 12th day of the first month. And then they arrive at Jerusalem on the first day of the fifth month. And this is all in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, based on their reckoning. So what Miller did is he believed that Jesus was crucified on the 12th day of the first month, not on the 14th, which I think is quite bizarre. But that's the way that he understood it. And nobody seemed to have challenged him. I can't find any record of any of the opponents of the message challenging that. And he believed that Jesus was born in 1 AD. So it's kind of a strange way in which he looked at things, but he believed that Jesus was born or at the end of 1 BC. So he sort of believed in like a December 25th birthday for Jesus in 1 BC. And so, he has Jesus being crucified, when he's 33 in the spring. It doesn't work out. It's just Miller was not very precise when it came to chronology. He dealt with the big numbers, but he never worked out the fine little details. And he believed that Jesus was crucified on the 12th day of the first month in 33 AD, and that ended the 70 weeks. So he never had Christ crucified in the midst of the week. He had him crucified at the end of the 70th week, which I find odd. Maybe he took the midst of the week as a Wednesday or something. I don't know, but that wouldn't make any sense. It would be inconsistent. But anyway, this was the problem. And so once they realized this problem, they had a new problem. So it wasn't just about 1843. If there's no 0 year, then the 490 years would end where? If you start in 457 in the spring, where would they end?
33.
No, if there's no 0 year, once they realized there was no 0 year, and they have them start in the spring of 457. See, because originally he just adds 457 plus 33, and that gives you 490. But if once they recognized there was no 0 year, where would they have to finish the
34?
In 34, right? Which is where we end it now. But you can see the problem. If he believed that Jesus was crucified at the end of the 70 weeks, then when you recognize there's no 0 year, now all of a sudden Jesus' crucifixion in 33 doesn't fit. So it wasn't just the issue of 1843 that they had to address. They had to also address the 70 weeks. And this is the thing that Snow worked out. So in 1843, they start to realize they've made some mistakes and they're trying to compensate for this. And in order to compensate, they get rather confused. That is, everybody's quite confused about it. It's not just a little issue. It's a big issue for them. Now, it was in Joshua Vheim's quotes Miller in January of 1843 saying, "I believe the time can be known by all who desire to understand to be ready for his coming. And I'm fully convinced that sometime between March 21st, 1843 and March 21st, 1844, according to the Jewish mode of computation of time, Christ will come and bring all his saints with him, and that he will reward every man as his work shall be." So you can see even in January, Vheim starts to understand that Miller has said, and Miller has said this actually in December, in a book that was published in December of 1842. So after they had made the chart, Miller now says, you know, we're not going to look at 1843 as going from January 1st to December 31st. We're going to look at as going from March 21st to March 21st, just basically the spring equinox. And I'm not really sure what he means by according to the Jewish mode of computation of time. Now, it does happen to be in 1844 that March 21st was the first day of the first month on the Jewish calendar, but it wasn't that case. That wasn't the case in March 21st, 1843. So they actually start the year later than March 21st or earlier. Can't remember. Is it? Yeah, it's later. So this is January 25th, 1843, that they have this statement of Miller's published in Vheim's Signs of the Times, right? Now, we can see that even though Christ could come in 1844 in their understanding of things, this would be the Jewish year 1843. Now, it's not clear whether Miller at that point understood that there was no 0 year, because he doesn't mention it. But I think they're starting to get the idea at that time that there is no 0 year. And that's what Vheim is going to address here. So one of the problems that presented itself as Vheim began to take into account that there was no 0 year between 1 BC and 1 AD was the reckoning of the 70 weeks. So I mentioned that. He says, April AD 33 was not the end of the Jewish year 33 from the Vulgar era, but in the year 33, the first month, so that but 32 full years from the Vulgar era had passed. If the 70 weeks did not commence till the beginning of 457 BC, they would not end till the end of 33 AD. The 1810 years from 33 AD completes 2300 and brings us to the end of 1843, right? So the vision may end at any time between this, the present time. So he's writing this in July of 1843 and March 21st, 1844, as in the synopsis of Miller's views. So at this point in the summer of 1843, they're looking to March 21st, 1844 as the end. But notice they haven't really done anything. They mention the 70 weeks, but they don't mention the problem that they have regarding the crucifixion marking the end of it. Since Miller had placed the termination of the 70 weeks with the crucifixion of Christ, this created a problem for Vheim. When he first recognized the problem, he almost changed the commencement of the 70 weeks and the 2300 days to 458 BC to address it. Notice that this is 10 weeks before the previous statement and 7 weeks before he introduces the full year concept. So this is in May of 1843. Now it's interesting, it's May 3rd of 1843. It was on May 2nd in 1843 that Miller said that Jesus may come in the fall of 1843. So you can see there's a lot of stuff happening in 1843. It is true that from a given point in the year 457 BC to the same point in AD 1843 would be but 22,099 years. We therefore find that some date the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus, BC 458, and which is undoubtedly correct. So what has he done here? I mean, they've had 457 BC as their starting date. So what is he doing here by just going to 458? How would you characterize this? Anybody?
Well, we might say he was just fudging the numbers, but he had to have a reason.
Okay, well, I wouldn't say he's fudging the numbers. I would say he's basing this that they made a mistake, but the mistake is in 450 at the beginning. So he's saying the mistake is at the beginning. Now, it is true that Artaxerxes would have counted his reign, the 7th year of his reign would have began in the spring of 458 and end in the spring of 457. And now, when you say that the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus was issued in 458, many people would have had it issued actually in the fall. And I don't think I deal with it in this paper too much on how Snow looked at it. It's in some other papers. But if you read what Snow says, he's going to change as he goes through 1844 on how he sees the start of the 2300 days, or especially where Artaxerxes' decree occurs. So they're going to have this problem, this uncertainty about where to start the 2300 days. So he says, and if the 70 weeks terminated, as all admit, in AD 33, then the 2300 days must terminate in 1810 years from that point, which would be in AD 1843. So you can see here, he's going to go to this 458 BC date, and that's going to solve the problem of the 70 weeks. It's going to keep it in 33 AD, and he just says, okay, we're going to go 458. We're just going to move it 1 year earlier. Miller was just wrong about that part. Other people put it in 458, and this must be correct. Now, I have some charts here where I try to explain some of that, but I'm not going to go through that. And then you're going to have, I don't know if I had his other quote. So he's going to change his view anyway. He's going to go back to that. Now, this is an interesting point. At the end of the Jewish year 1840, as the end of the Jewish year 1843 came to its end, there was a further refinement in regards to the termination of the Jewish year 1843. This was the introduction of the Karaite calendar in their calculations. Vheim explains this in the same article where he introduces the full year concept. So as they're going through the year 1843, so they're in the year 1843, they're now going to start looking at this Karaite calendar. So he says here something which is not true. So he's quoting another source, and that source is incorrect. He says, now there is a dispute between rabbinical and Karaite Jews as to the correct time of the commencing the year. The former are scattered all over the world and cannot observe the time of the ripening of that harvest in Judea. They therefore regulate the commencement of the year by astronomical calculations and commence with the first day of the new moon nearest the vernal equinox, when the sun is in Aries. And this is true. So the Jews actually don't observe the moon, right? They don't, and it's not really about the ripening of the grain or the harvest in Judea. That's actually misdirection, which comes from the Karaites. But they do put the new moon nearest the vernal equinox. So that means the start of the year for rabbinic Jews is going to be based on calculations anywhere from, March 8th all the way to, the beginning of April. So they're going to have the first day of the first month anywhere from March 8th, I believe, to March 6th, or March 7th, maybe even to March 6th, something like that, or April 6th. So they have this period of time, this month. They could never have the year start on April 19th, the rabbinic calendar. But this is also true of the Karaite calendar. The Karaite calendar never starts as late as April 19th. But let's go on and look at this. So it says here, the Karaite Jews, on the contrary, still adhere to the letter of the Mosaic law and commence with the new moon nearest the barley harvest in Judea, which is 1 month later than the rabbinical year. Now that's not true. So there are situations in which the Karaites will start the year 1 month later than the rabbis. But that would only be in the situations where the rabbis are beginning the year very early, like March 7th or 8th or 9th or 10th. But in years when the rabbis are starting the year on March 21st, as they did in 1843, the Karaites would also start the year at that time. So you would never have the Karaites beginning the year on April 19th. Now, what they believed here, based upon this statement, is that the Karaites always started the year 1 month later than the rabbis. And that's just not true. So he says here, the Jewish year of AD 1843, as the Karaites reckoned it, in accordance with the Mosaic law, therefore, commenced this year with the new moon on the 29th day of April. And the Jewish year will commence with the new moon in next April, when 1843 and 2300 days, according to their computation, will expire. Now, that is not true that the Karaites commenced the year in 1843 on April 29th. That's just not the case. So he's incorrect. That didn't happen. They would never begin the year that late. And they began it the same as the Jews did in 1843, and they began it the same as the Jews did in 1844. So he just had this false belief regarding how the Karaites' calendar worked. But according to rabbinical Jews, it began with the new moon in the first of last April. And it did as well with the Karaites in 1843, and will expire with the new moon in the month of March next, which is true. So the Karaites and the rabbis in 1843 and 1844 observed the same beginning of the year. Now, the Karaites had other differences regarding their calendar. More significantly is how they placed the Pentecost. So they always put the Pentecost on a Sunday, which is not the case with the rabbis. So they had a different way of counting Pentecost and other little details about their calendar. So but it is true that they did use the barley harvest, the Karaites did, but the barley harvest would never, in any situation, push the start of the year as late as April 19th. It may then be asked why we are now looking for the coming of the Lord if we are but just entered the last of the 2300 years. It is upon this principle, if the 70 weeks were fulfilled at the ascension of our Lord in 33 AD and began in 457, they must have been fulfilled in the commencement of the 490th year, and which would not end till the commencement of AD 34. So now what he's doing is he's going back to 457 BC. This is June of 1843. So it was in May that he had made the statement that it's evidently the correct date is 458. Now he's not doing that. He's just saying that Jesus just began at the commencement of the 490th year, that he began his ascension, not the end. So they're trying to sort this out. I wouldn't say that they're fudging numbers. I don't think that that's what's happening. They're trying to sort out this chronology, and they don't have the key yet. That key is going to be found by Samuel Snow, and that has to do with the midst of the week. And this is just a statement in April 24th, 1844, regarding how they look at this span of time, the civil and the ecclesiastical. So as our time has thus passed, so he's talking about the time of Miller, the civil year having terminated last October. So in October of 1843, that was the end of the civil year. And the ecclesiastical with the new moon in April, I put 18 there in brackets, but that's the date that they had. We are now prepared to tell the world what we shall do, a question which has often been asked. We intend to hold fast the integrity of our faith without wavering, and not cast away our confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. We intend to continue to comfort one another with the words of the coming of Christ, who will come and will not tarry. We shall continue to believe God's word in its literal acceptation, for not one jot or tittle of all that is written therein will fail. So about 5 days after April 19th, or 6 days after April 18th, they know that their period has failed. Now, we know that Samuel Snow had his first article published in the Signs on April 3rd. So basically 21 days prior to this, so 3 weeks before, Samuel Snow had been allowed to publish with a disclaimer by the editors that Jesus was going to come back in the fall. So what's going to happen is they're going to look at this. Now, what's the significance of this? The fact that Snow had recognized that Jesus was coming back in the fall, or that the 2300 days ended in the fall, and that the leadership was behind in pushing this spring end of the 2300 days. What's the significance of that for us? Anybody with thoughts on that?
Well, we hate to say that the leadership is always wrong.
I wouldn't say the leadership is always wrong. That's not true. But there are points in which the leadership, light doesn't always come to the leadership. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Agreed. Yeah. So sometimes light comes from other quarters, which is an extremely important lesson to learn. And it's something I think that Jeff learned a long time ago. That's why he was able to accept light from others. He recognized that leadership wasn't always the channel of light. He felt a responsibility to listen to, and he would often send me emails to consider from people who had sometimes quite radical ideas and say, what do you think of what this person's saying? You know, he wouldn't just dismiss something because of where it came from. And even just because it sometimes was mixed with error. A good example of this was on November 9th, when I was there in Arkansas. He actually sent out an email, which I've shared in other places, of this guy who's quite bombastic, quite arrogant as well, about his interpretation of Acts chapter 27. And it was some pretty crazy ideas in there. And it was written in just, if you want somebody not to accept what you're saying, that's the way to write it. And so but Jeff still sent it out to people to evaluate it. And there was some light in it. Jeff was able to see that there was some things this person was saying that we might need to consider. So I think it's an important point there. The other point, which I see, is that this light is progressive, and we have to be aware that of that fact, and that it can come from different places. And that God, in a sense, is always warning us ahead of the time. You know, so one of the things we could look at with July 18th is we had information that maybe that prediction would fail. And now that wasn't heeded, but I think it's just normal for that to happen. It's not like some sin on the part of the Millerites, for instance, that they didn't just accept what Samuel Snow said. But the thing that was good is that they did publish it. They didn't just shut him down. They didn't silence him. Even if they thought it might be incorrect, they still allowed that to be seen. And I think that's something that the new movement definitely did not want happening. They didn't want any light coming from, that wasn't coming from Parminder or Tess. And then we saw that sort of continued with Bronwyn in trying to shut down light that they didn't like. instead of allowing people to evaluate it, allowing the movement to evaluate it. They wanted the leadership to evaluate it. So they made exactly the same errors that they had criticized the Omega of. And really, in a sense, they're part of the Omega. So hopefully that's helpful in understanding some of these issues. Now, we will go into much more detail about Samuel Snow later. And because I don't have it here in this paper. Well, maybe I do, because I do have Samuel Snow's. So maybe I should just finish this part off. So this is Samuel Snow's February 16th letter. So listen to what he says here. The 2300 days of Daniel 8 began with the 70 weeks of 457 BC, but they did not begin with the first day of that year. It is true that Ezra began to go up from Babylon on the first day of the first month, but this was not in the year 457 BC, but in the year 456. So what is Snow doing here in his first publishing of what later became the Midnight Cry? Where is he going to have the decree issued? If Artaxerxes is going from Babylon to Jerusalem in 456 BC, that's a year later. So what is he going to do here? Now, he's going to make a mistake here. He says here, the 7th year of Artaxerxes, in which Ezra went up, began according to Dr. Hale's analysis of chronology in 457 and ended in 456. What is it? Does anybody know the mistake that Snow is making here? Anybody know who Dr. Hales is and anything about his chronology?
We're not speaking about Apollos Hale.
No, no.
So we're speaking about a chronologer that is prior to the Millerite time, but some were referring to.
Right. Now, he is actually an astronomer. And astronomers, when they talk about BC dates, they do have a 0 year. So when he says 457 and 456, according to Hale's chronology, what year BC is 457? If you have a 0 year, 457 would be what year on a BC date?
Would that make it like an ordinal number, like the 457th year?
No, this would make it a cardinal. So it would just be 458 BC is 457 on the astronomer's calculation, because it's actually minus 457. It's not really 457 BC. You would have a minus sign. And so if you're looking on an astronomer's date and it says minus 457, that's actually 458 BC. So according to Dr. Hale, he is actually having 458 BC and to 457 BC for Artaxerxes' 7th year. But Snow doesn't recognize that. He doesn't recognize that Dr. Hale's is actually using an astronomical BC date. So that was one of the confusions that was happening. People didn't quite understand what was occurring. And he just says, so 457 BC, that's 457 BC, but no, it's 458. So he makes this mistake. So what he believes is that the decree is issued in the fall of 457 BC. And that's from when you count the 2300 days. He's not counting it from when Ezra leaves Babylon. He's not counting it from the 10th day of the 7th month. when Ezra is in Babylon, that is the center date between the first day of the 5th month and the 20th day of the 9th month, right? He's putting all those things 1 year later, and so it's a messed up chronology. So this was a problem that Snow continued to have in his calculations. And so he would often say that the 2300 days begin from the issuing of the decree, right? So he says here, it appears then that the decree from which the 70 weeks and the 2300 days are to be dated must have been issued by the king sometime before the 10th month of the Jewish year, 457 BC. And I'm not sure why he necessarily chooses the 10th month. From the time, according to Daniel 9:25, there will be 69 weeks. So there's some reason why he has the 10th year. Something about Esther. Oh, that's another mistake. So what he has here, who does he think Artaxerxes is? If you look at, he's referencing Esther. So what is he doing, Dwight? When he's referencing Esther here. From Esther 2:16, we learned that she was made queen in the 10th month of the Jewish year and in the 7th year of the king. So what's he doing?
So what he's doing is he's applying a Ahasuerus in this situation.
Okay. So he actually thinks that the king in the book of Esther is Artaxerxes.
Right.
And why does he do that?
He's making a misapplication.
Because of the Septuagint.
Right.
Right. So we and the Apocrypha, the Apocrypha, which the Septuagint has. So he has the Apocrypha. He's looking at the book of Ezra as it is in the Apocrypha, where it talks about Artaxerxes as being the king in the story of Esther.
Okay, the book of Ezra in the Apocrypha? No, the book of Esther in the Apocrypha.
Yeah, I meant the book of Esther. Yeah, so the book of Esther in the Apocrypha. That's correct. So he's looking at the book of Esther in the Apocrypha, and it calls him Artaxerxes instead of Xerxes or Ahasuerus. And that's because of that title so it wasn't that they thought that Artaxerxes Longimanus, the people who wrote the book of Esther, was the king at the time of Xerxes. They just used the same title. So Xerxes and Artaxerxes can be the same person, but it's not Artaxerxes Longimanus, right? So you can see the confusion that's here. So he's going to have it as being Xerxes is going to be Artaxerxes, and that it's in the 10th month of the 7th year, or after the 10th month of the 7th year, in 457. Of course, he's placing Esther then in the wrong period of time. So you can see that there's a lot of confusion that is going on as they're trying to sort this out, right? Because remember, he writes this in February of 1844. Now, when he gets to August 22nd of 1844, so about 6 months later, he's going to have some of this sorted out, not all of it. So when you look at the True Midnight Cry that's published on August 22nd, 1844, which would have been what he presented on August 15th, he has sorted out some of these errors. He doesn't have Artaxerxes as being the king in Esther. He recognizes that was wrong. He still has some issues as far as where he starts the 70 weeks. He's not going to start it with the baptism of Christ. So there's lots of little details like that that he gets wrong. But he still is going to deal with the issuing of the decree. And I'm not going to go into all the details. So we'll look at that at some point. Now, so we spent a lot of time. I hope it was useful looking at these things because they should be understood by us. I mean, we're Seventh-day Adventists at the end of the world who are looking back at this history. And so when we look at this history of the midnight cry and the problems that they had, because they were just as confused as we are. I mean, you read some of the articles, people are making mistakes continually and they're trying to do their calculations. They get confused about the no-zero year. They flip back and forth. Did it happen in the spring? Did it happen in the fall? All these types of things. Now, you'll even see Adventists, people like J.N. Andrews, even putting the decree issued in the fall of 457 BC. So you'll constantly see this mistake repeated right from Samuel Snow's issuing of the decree in the fall of 457, which really would have been, in his view, 458 if he had understood what he was doing with Apollos Hale, or not Apollos Hale, Dr. Hales. So when we get confused about it, I think it's understandable, right? If the Millerites who were looking at this were getting confused by it, it's no wonder that we can still be confused by it. It's not an easy issue. It takes time to sort through it. So I recommend people go to my academia site and look at that article that I just read from, because they're all there, all my articles, and understand this point, right? Because this is an important point of understanding that chronology. So now we go on, we're just going to read, I guess, a little bit today of here. He said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed by fire, which was the earth, right? Again and again, I've been shown that the past experiences of God's people are not to be counted as dead facts. We're not to treat the record of these experiences as we would treat a last year's almanac. The record is to be kept in mind, for history will repeat itself. And we've read this statement before. But what does she mean should not be counted as dead facts? How would we do that?
If it was treated as unimportant history.
Okay, unimportant history. Now, the record of these experiences, what's the important point that she, if you take the opposite of dead facts, what words would you use? If they're not going to be counted as dead facts, what would they be counted as?
Waymarks.
Okay, well, that's true. How about living experiences?
Yeah, so she's kind of emphasizing what happened rather than when it happened.
I wouldn't say that's what she's saying. Why would you say that?
When she's referring to experiences.
Okay, but their experience is based upon when it happened. So
Yeah.
I would think that's an important detail of when it happened. I would think that this would actually be telling us we need to look at it as living experience. So there's a living experience. Now, in order for it to be a living experience, what would that mean to us? She says it in the next sentence.
Yeah, well, I think that the history of the experience they went through would repeat in our time. Yeah, repeat itself.
Right. So yeah.
Sunday legislation.
Okay, but I don't see Sunday legislation in her statement here. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but when she says history will repeat itself, does that not also have to do with dates and time? Isn't history about dates?
Dates, events, times, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely a part of it.
So I would think that she is telling us that these dates, because the dates are what we would consider these dead facts. You know, something happened on such and such a date, big deal. But she's saying, no, These are the record of these experiences, because these are going to repeat. And so when history repeats, we're not just looking at a similarity of events, even the timing of events, the dates themselves, because the record is to be kept in mind. And when we look at history and history is recorded, it's recorded by dates. You know, July 4th, 1776. You say that date, what is it telling you? It's telling you a lot of information, right? Because we attach the information or these experiences or these records to dates.
Symbolic of everything that happened.
Yeah. So I would think that this is something telling us that we need to be aware of all of these dates. And what does an almanac do? One of the things it does. I mean, we don't use almanacs much more, and there's like the old farmer's almanac and so forth. But what's one of the things it does? The most important thing it does?
I guess it puts things in order throughout the year.
Yeah, it gives the dates and the timing of things. It gives you the full moons. It gives you basically the best time to plant and to harvest, you know, based upon astronomical events. It is a list of astronomical events. That's one of the things that it does. Now, it'll also, you know, try to predict the weather, what the weather's going to be like, which of course it never is accurate, except that, you know, generally it's colder in the winter and warmer in the summer. But I've always looked at last year's almanacs to compare them. People just buy them every year and think, you know, that they're accurate, but they're not. But anyway, and they'll have lots of other things like that. So the astronomical things that occur, and these are meant often for farmers, but almanacs are not just about for farmers. Astronomers use almanacs as well. They're going to know when there's going to be an eclipse, or there's going to be an eclipse of the moon, or different astronomical events, the lining up of planets, or different astronomical phenomena that could be noticed. These would be in an almanac. So if we're not going to treat them as last year's almanac, right, as a last year's almanac, we're going to treat them as what kind of almanac?
This year's almanac.
Right. This year's almanac, right? So that means we're going to look at the past, and we're going to look at the times, and we're going to address them, because these are not just a record of the past. This is the repeating of history. So I think it's an extremely important statement that just kind of we skip over and we read into it. It is about the experiences, but has this movement experienced Millerite history?
Apparently so.
We have experienced Millerite history. It wasn't, for some reason, we weren't expecting to, because we were saying that we're repeating Millerite history. But did we really expect that we were going to experience Millerite history?
No, not really.
Not really, because when we experienced it, what did we say?
Oh, yeah, we said, oh, this is all wrong. It didn't really happen.
Yeah, so we said this was wrong. We said we must have made a mistake, even though we actually, to the very letter, experienced Millerite history. We experienced the parable of the 10 virgins to the very letter, and yet we didn't recognize it. When I say we, I just say in the movement in general. Now, some of us do recognize it. Many of those that didn't recognize it have left. And I would say that probably even some in this movement still don't quite understand it. Because people often keep saying, you know, we don't quite understand July 18th yet, what it was, what it means, which I believe we do. Now, maybe there's more, but I don't think that we're left in darkness. Larry Lesher tried to argue this, that, You know, we didn't have anything happen the next day like Hiram Edson had when he, you know, had the vision of Christ moving from the holy to the most holy place. And I said, well, there was a couple of points. First, I said we did. Because what I presented on July 19th is very much a parallel to Hiram Edson in the cornfield on October 23rd. That is, I already had the explanation for our disappointment. I didn't have all of the answers, but I had enough. And neither did Hiram Edson. He just had a vision. But Hiram Edson's vision wasn't well known. He wrote it down, I think, in the 1860s or the late 1850s. And it was not common knowledge. That is, Adventists did not know about Hiram Edson's cornfield vision until 1905. Now, a few people might have known it who knew him personally, but Hiram Edson was not a major figure. He was friends of James and Ellen White. That was true. But in the Millerite movement, he wasn't a major figure. He was really a nobody. He was friends of Crozier, and Crozier and him studied. Crozier presented in 1846 in February the Daystar article, which was a result of some of the understanding that came from that cornfield vision. But people did not know that it was this cornfield vision that led to this understanding. So we wouldn't expect that the next day the movement just already understands the disappointment. Some people might understand on July 19th why it happened, but that understanding still unfolded. So this is an important point when we look at the comparison between our history and Millerite history, is that we need to be honest to that comparison. And this was a point that Larry Lesher did not like when I pointed it out. He actually totally ignored it. He still stuck to his point, even though it was easily refuted that that's not what happened. Now, the shut door, and at midnight there was a cry made, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said unto the wise, "Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out." But the wise answered, saying, "Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you. But go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. So we know this is the parable of the 10 virgins. So when is the midnight cry in this movement? When was it?
The Nashville announcement?
No. It's not the midnight cry.
Then you're thinking earlier than that.
Mm-hmm. We marked it when it happened.
October 13th.
October 13th, 2018. That was the midnight cry for this movement. Now, we believed that November 9th and July 18th were going to be midnight and the midnight cry for the Levites, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So even in this movement, people did not understand October 13th, the significance of it. They didn't understand that we have different lines. Now, if October 13th was the midnight cry for this movement is Samuel Snow. What are November 9th and July 18th?
I remember October 13th, but I don't remember what year that was. Was that 2018 or 2019?
2018. So it's 2018. That's when we counted the 391 and a half days to November 9th, 2019. but we said that that was the midnight cry for this movement. And then we expected November 9th to follow for the Levites to be midnight. And, you know, different people had it different ways. Some people put that that was going to be the midnight cry. But we eventually moved so that midnight would be November 9th and the midnight cry would be July 18th. And then we had to have December 25th would be, after that would be the Sunday law. So that would be the closed door for Adventists. That's how we were looking at it in 2018. But what purpose did November 9th and July 18th serve?
Well,
Okay, Stephen?
They're typical.
Okay, they're typical of what? So they're typical, go on.
Of what the midnight and midnight cry is for the Levites.
Right, so they were typical midnight and midnight cry. They weren't the actual ones for the Levites. Now, there's a bunch of things that happened there. So between midnight and the midnight cry, the typical ones, between November 9th and July 18th, what happened that we predicted was going to happen between midnight and the midnight cry?
The false priests would be separated from the movement.
Okay, well, we didn't necessarily predict that initially. So if you go back to January 14th, 2017, Jeff made a prediction of what would occur between Raphi and Peniam, which marked midnight and the midnight cry for the Levites, and what was going to happen between those two dates.
Pandemic.
The pandemic, right? Now, the pandemic did occur between November 9th and July 18th. And we also had this other date as a symbol, March 27th. And for me, March 27th was the day that I got laid off because of the pandemic. And there's a bunch of other things. Of course, we know that the Adventist Church began 100 days of prayer that ended on July 4th, which is 144,000 minutes. But anyway, we have all of these things that happened, but we know that they were typical, that they weren't the actual Battle of Raphi and Battle of Peniam that we were looking for, but they are typical of it. Now, we had something that was quite interesting that happened in connection with November 9th. And how would we characterize that? The event that Pat was talking about, the separation of the true and false priests. How do we line that up? If we're going to line it up with Millerite history, you would line November 9th up with what date?
April 19.
April 19, right? The first disappointment. And July 18th, you would line up with what?
October 22nd.
October 22nd. In that application, we also know that July 18th lines up with July 18th. That is, you could put July 18th as July 18th in 1844 for this movement. But we can also see that November 9th is the first day of the first month in that symbolism of what happened in the separation from the true and the false priests. And the July 18th, in our experience, gave us a parallel to October 22nd, 1844. So this is not dead facts. Millerite history is not dead facts. It's a living experience. It's this year's almanac, telling us, giving us light for our feet, telling us where we are, and giving us this opportunity to prepare and be ready. And it also lays out our work that has to be accomplished in regard to planting and sowing and the harvest. So we need to understand this history. We can't set it aside. We can't just say it's the past, because it is the present, because history is repeating itself, and we are in the midst of that repetition of history.
What time do you think will, or what event might put us back on the big line?
Well, the next event in the big line is the Sunday law.
You don't want to put Raphia or Panium on the big line?
Those aren't the big line. That's the line of the Levites. That's midnight in the midnight cry. Those aren't part of the big line. Because if you take midnight in the midnight cry, they line up with the Sunday law and the loud cry. So that's the big line. So if you mean where are we going to be on the line of the Levites, these are events connected with the Sunday law, dealing with the image of the beast test. Now, I still believe that there's a Raphian and a Panium coming, but I'm not sure exactly how to understand them yet, of what events they are and how they're going to work. We're going to have to wait and see. But we are to measure the time and to look at the dates and look at all the evidence that God has given us. And we have to be watching, right? We need to have oil in our vessels. We need to be studying his word. We can't just wait until those events happen and think we will be ready. Because if we're not studying, and we're not studying the right things, and we're not going through the experience and recognizing where we are, we're not going to be ready when we get there, wherever that is and whenever that is. So that I think is what we learn by studying Millerite history in this way. Okay, so let's close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful once again for the way that you lead in these studies. We know that we ask for your Holy Spirit to be poured out. And we believe, Lord, that it has been. And we feel, Lord, the conviction that we have a greater desire to study and to understand these things. We ask for forgiveness for our neglect in the past, for our times of discouragement when we have felt like giving up, the times that we were uncertain as to your leading. Help us, Lord, to recognize that you are in control of our lives. Help us again to cling to you in spite of the fact of what we see in ourselves. Again, be with each person, with those struggles that we face each day. And help us, Lord, to reflect your character and to come forth as conquerors. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.